Romeo lived in a small and quiet village in Italy. He was a young boy with kind eyes and a brave heart. His family was poor and life was not easy for them. Every day, Romeo helped his father work in the fields. He dreamed of a better life for himself and his family. But he never knew that everything was about to change. One morning, a strange man came to the village. He wore a long coat and had a cold smile on his face. He walked slowly through the streets and looked at the boys. He stopped in front of Romeo and looked at him carefully. "Do you want to work in Rome and help your family?" he asked. Romeo looked at his father and saw the sadness in his eyes. Romeo's father listened to the man very carefully that day. The man promised good money and a safe place to stay. His father had no choice. The family needed the money badly. That night, Romeo packed his small bag with a few things. His mother held him tight and whispered, "Be careful, my son." The next morning, Romeo left his village for the first time. The journey to Rome was long and very tiring for Romeo. He sat quietly and watched the fields and trees pass by. The strange man said nothing and kept his eyes on the road. Romeo felt something was not right, but he said nothing. When they arrived, Rome was big, loud, and very confusing. Romeo had never seen a city so large in his whole life. The man took Romeo to a small and dirty room near the market. There were other boys there, tired, quiet, and afraid. "You will work here and give me part of your money," he said. Romeo looked around and felt very alone for the first time. But he remembered his mother's words and stayed strong inside. He told himself, "I will survive this and go back home." The next day, Romeo walked alone through the streets of Rome. He had no money, no friends, and no one to help him. Then he saw an old man standing near a tall building. The man was looking up at the chimney on the roof above. "Boy, can you climb?" the old man asked with a tired voice. Romeo looked up, took a deep breath, and said, "Yes, I can." The old man's name was Signor Ricci, a chimney cleaner. He had worked in Rome for many years cleaning chimneys alone. He needed a young and strong helper to climb the tall roofs. Romeo was small, brave, and not afraid of high places at all. Signor Ricci looked at him carefully and then nodded slowly. "You will work with me and sleep at my house," he said kindly. Signor Ricci's house was small but warm and very clean inside. Romeo walked in and saw a woman standing in the kitchen. She was Signora Ricci, and she did not look very happy. She looked at Romeo from head to toe and said nothing at first. "Another boy in my house," she said coldly and walked away. Romeo stood quietly and felt the coldness in her words. That evening, Romeo heard a soft sound near the small garden. He walked outside and saw a girl sitting under an old tree. She had long dark hair and was reading a small book quietly. She looked up and saw Romeo standing there watching her. "My name is Juliet," she said with a warm and friendly smile. Romeo smiled back and felt something warm inside his heart. The next morning, Romeo started working with Signor Ricci early. They carried their long brushes and heavy bags through the streets. Romeo climbed the roofs carefully while Signor Ricci waited below. The work was hard, dirty, and very dangerous most of the time. But Romeo never complained. He thought of his family back home. Every night he counted his small coins and felt a little hope. One evening, Romeo was walking home alone through a dark street. He heard loud voices coming from behind an old stone wall. He stopped and looked carefully through a small hole in the wall. He saw 7 boys laughing and dividing stolen coins between them. Their leader was tall with cold eyes. His name was Giovanni. Romeo stepped back slowly, but Giovanni's eyes had already found him. Romeo ran fast through the narrow streets of Rome that night. He turned left and right until he finally lost them in the dark. He arrived home breathing fast with his heart beating very loud. He said nothing to Signor Ricci and went to his room quietly. But that night he could not sleep. He kept seeing Giovanni's eyes. He knew deep inside that this was not the last time they would meet. The next day, Romeo went to work as usual with Signor Ricci. When he returned, he found his bag of tools completely empty. Someone had taken all his brushes, ropes, and cleaning tools. Romeo looked around the street, but saw no one standing nearby. Then he noticed a black mark on the wall shaped like a wolf. He remembered Giovanni and felt anger rising inside his chest. Romeo followed the wolf marks through the streets very carefully. The marks led him to an old and broken building near the river. He hid behind a wall and watched the boys inside laughing loudly. He could see his tools sitting in the corner of the dark room. He recognized the boys. They were Giovanni's wolves without doubt. Romeo memorized every face and walked away quietly into the night. Romeo told Juliet everything that evening in the small garden. She listened carefully and did not interrupt him even once. "You need friends, Romeo. You cannot face them alone," she said. Romeo looked down and realized that she was completely right. "But where will I find real friends in a city this big?" he asked. Juliet smiled and said, "Keep your eyes open. They are out there." A few days later, Romeo was cleaning a chimney near the old market. He heard shouting below and looked down from the high roof. He saw a boy surrounded by 3 of Giovanni's wolves in the street. The boy was trying to fight back, but there were too many of them. Romeo climbed down as fast as he could and ran toward them. He stood beside the boy, and the wolves laughed and walked away. The boy's name was Alfredo, strong, smart, and full of courage. He wiped the dust from his face and looked at Romeo carefully. "You did not have to do that," Alfredo said with a serious face. "I know," said Romeo simply, "but it was the right thing to do." Alfredo was quiet for a moment, and then he smiled slowly. "Come with me," he said. "I want you to meet someone important." Alfredo took Romeo through small streets and hidden passages carefully. They stopped in front of an old building covered with green plants. Alfredo knocked 3 times slowly on the heavy wooden door. The door opened, and Romeo saw 6 boys sitting inside the room. The room was their secret hiding place, warm, safe, and hidden. "Everyone, this is Romeo," said Alfredo with a proud voice. Romeo looked around and saw the faces of his new friends clearly. Dante was the smart one, always thinking and reading old maps. Antonio was the strongest, big hands, and a very quiet voice. Luca was the fastest. He could run like the wind in the streets. Pietro sat in the corner watching everything with his calm eyes. Bruno laughed loudly and said, "Welcome, brother. Sit down and eat." Alfredo explained everything to Romeo that evening very clearly. Giovanni's wolves had been terrorizing the streets for a long time. They stole from workers, threatened families, and hurt innocent people. The brave ones had been fighting them with courage and smart plans. "We do not fight with anger," said Alfredo. "We fight with our minds." Romeo listened carefully and felt something new growing inside him. Romeo came back to Signor Ricci's house very late that night. He saw Marco, Signor Ricci's son, standing near the front door. Marco smiled at Romeo and asked where he had been all evening. "Just walking around the city," Romeo said with a calm voice. Marco nodded slowly and patted Romeo's shoulder in a friendly way. But as Romeo walked inside, Marco's smile slowly disappeared. The following week, the wolves stole from 3 chimney workers. Alfredo gathered everyone in the secret hiding place that evening. Dante spread an old map of Rome on the table very carefully. "They always attack here, here, and here," he said, pointing slowly. "If we split into pairs and watch these streets, we can stop them." Romeo looked at the map and felt his mind working fast and clear. The next morning, Romeo and Antonio watched the old market street. They saw Enzo and Carlo walking slowly and looking at the workers. Romeo signaled to Antonio, and they followed them from a safe distance. Enzo suddenly grabbed a worker's bag and started running very fast. Antonio ran after him while Romeo blocked the other end of the street. Enzo stopped, trapped between them, and dropped the bag slowly. Giovanni heard what happened, and his face turned red with anger. He called all his wolves together in the dark building that evening. "Find the chimney boy and make him regret what he did," he said coldly. Viola sat in the corner and listened without saying a single word. She had seen Romeo's face when he helped Antonio catch Enzo that day. Something about his courage stayed in her mind all through the night. 3 days later, Romeo was walking home alone after work ended. Four wolves appeared suddenly from the shadows of a narrow street. Sergio grabbed Romeo's arm and pushed him hard against the cold wall. "Giovanni wants you to stop," Sergio said with a dangerous voice. Romeo looked at all four of them and kept his face very calm. "Tell Giovanni that I have not even started yet," Romeo said quietly. The wolves pushed Romeo to the ground and walked away laughing loudly. Romeo stood up slowly, cleaned his jacket, and walked home in pain. That night he told Alfredo everything that had happened in the street. Alfredo listened and then called Dante to bring the map immediately. "We need a new plan," said Alfredo. "They are getting more dangerous." Romeo nodded and said, "I think someone is telling them our movements." Dante started watching everyone who knew about their secret plans. He wrote names in a small notebook and checked each one carefully. One evening, he saw Marco talking quietly to Nero near the old bridge. Nero was Giovanni's most silent and most dangerous wolf of all. Dante stayed hidden and watched until they finished and walked away. He ran straight to the hiding place with his heart beating very fast. Dante told Alfredo and Romeo what he had seen near the bridge. The room went completely silent. No one could believe it at first. Romeo felt something cold inside. Marco lived in the same house. He knows where I sleep, where I work, and what time I come home. Alfredo put his hand on Romeo's shoulder and spoke very carefully. "Say nothing to Marco yet. We will use this to our advantage." The next morning, Giovanni went to the police with a false story. He told them that Romeo had stolen tools from a worker near the market. 2 police officers came to Signor Ricci's house before the sun rose. Romeo was taken away while Signora Ricci watched with cold eyes. Signor Ricci stood at the door looking confused and very worried. Juliet watched from her window with tears running down her face quietly. Romeo sat alone in the cold prison room feeling lost and very afraid. He thought of his family in the village and closed his eyes slowly. He told himself to stay strong and trust his friends completely. Meanwhile, Alfredo gathered everyone in the hiding place immediately. "We have 2 days to prove Romeo's innocence," Alfredo said seriously. Dante opened his notebook and said, "I know exactly where to start." Dante and Luca went to the market and spoke to all the workers there. They found 3 workers who had seen everything on that day clearly. The workers confirmed that Romeo was on the roof cleaning chimneys. Antonio found the real thief, one of Giovanni's wolves named Matteo. Pietro watched Matteo carefully and followed him through the streets. By evening, they had collected everything they needed to free Romeo. Alfredo went to the police station early the next morning with confidence. He brought the 3 workers and showed the officers all the evidence. The officers listened carefully and then checked everything very slowly. The evidence was clear. Romeo had not stolen anything from anyone. Giovanni's lie had completely fallen apart in front of the officers. Romeo walked out of the prison into the warm sunlight, feeling free. Romeo's friends were all waiting outside the prison gates for him. Bruno ran forward and hugged him so hard that Romeo could not breathe. "We told you we would never leave you alone," Bruno said, laughing loudly. Romeo looked at each face and felt something deep inside his heart. These were not just friends, they were his brothers in every way. That evening they sat together in the hiding place and made new plans. Viola had watched everything from a distance for many weeks now. She saw how the brave ones never left Romeo alone in his hardest moment. She saw how they laughed together, planned together, and protected each other. Giovanni only cared about power and money, never about his own people. One evening, Viola sat alone on the roof and thought for a long time. She realized that she was on the wrong side of this long fight. Romeo was walking near the old bridge alone one quiet evening. Viola appeared suddenly from the shadows and stopped in front of him. Romeo stepped back and looked at her with careful and suspicious eyes. "I am not here to hurt you," she said with a very different voice. "I know everything about Giovanni's next plan," she said quietly. Romeo looked at her for a long moment and then said, "Come with me." Viola sat inside the secret hiding place for the very first time. Every member of the brave ones watched her with careful and silent eyes. She told them everything: Giovanni's hiding place, his plans, and his secrets. She told them about Marco and how he had been spying on Romeo for months. Alfredo listened to every word without moving from his chair at all. When she finished, the room was completely silent for a long moment. Alfredo stood up slowly and looked at everyone around the table. "Tomorrow night, Giovanni plans to attack 3 workers near the river. We will be there before them, and we will end this once and for all." Dante drew the plan on the map while everyone listened very carefully. Each member had a specific role and position in the final plan. Romeo looked at Viola and nodded slowly. She had earned their trust. The next evening, the brave ones took their positions in the dark streets. Luca watched the river while Pietro covered the narrow street behind. Antonio and Bruno waited near the old stone wall, completely hidden. Dante stayed with Viola at a safe point to watch and signal the others. Romeo and Alfredo stood together in the center, calm and completely ready. The wolves appeared from the shadows, Giovanni walking at the front. Giovanni saw Romeo standing in the street and stopped with cold eyes. "You made a big mistake coming here tonight, boy," Giovanni said slowly. Romeo looked at him calmly and said, "No, you made the big mistake." At that moment, Luca whistled, and the brave ones appeared from everywhere. The wolves looked around and realized they were completely surrounded. Giovanni tried to run, but Antonio was already standing behind him. Viola stepped forward and faced Giovanni with strong and steady eyes. She told the police officers everything she knew about the wolves. Marco was found hiding near Signor Ricci's house and was arrested too. Giovanni and all his wolves were taken away one by one into the night. The streets of Rome were finally quiet and peaceful for the first time. The brave ones stood together and looked at each other without words. The next morning, all of Rome knew what the brave ones had done. Workers came and thanked them one by one throughout the whole day. Signor Ricci heard everything and felt deep shame about his son Marco. He called Romeo and apologized with tears running down his old face. "You are a good boy, Romeo. I should have trusted you from the start." Romeo shook his old hand gently and said, "It is already forgotten, sir." Signora Ricci had watched everything quietly from inside the house. For the first time, she looked at Romeo with different and softer eyes. She came to him that evening and placed a warm plate of food down. She said nothing, but Romeo understood. This was her way of saying sorry. Romeo smiled kindly and thanked her with a warm and respectful voice. That night the house felt warmer and more peaceful than ever before. Viola became a true member of the brave ones from that day forward. She was brave, sharp, and knew the streets of Rome better than anyone. The others accepted her completely, and Bruno gave her a new nickname. "You are one of us now, Viola. A true brave one forever," he said. Viola smiled for the first time in a very long time that evening. She had finally found people who made her feel safe and truly valued. Romeo continued working with Signor Ricci every morning as always. But now the streets felt different, lighter, safer, and full of hope. He saved his money carefully and sent some home to his family every week. His mother wrote him a letter saying she was proud of her brave son. Romeo read the letter 3 times and kept it close to his heart always. He knew that everything he had done was worth it, every single moment. Years passed slowly, and Romeo grew from a boy into a strong young man. Alfredo became a well-respected leader known across the streets of Rome. Dante used his sharp mind and became a very important man in the city. Antonio opened a small shop and worked hard with his own 2 hands. Luca, Pietro, and Bruno stayed close friends through every single season. The brave ones had grown up together, and nothing could ever separate them. Juliet had grown into a beautiful and very intelligent young woman. She had supported Romeo through every difficult moment without hesitation. She had given him ideas, courage, and a reason to keep going forward. Romeo had never forgotten her warm smile under the old tree that evening. One quiet afternoon, Romeo sat beside her in the small garden again. He held her hand gently and looked into her eyes for a long moment. "Juliet," Romeo said softly, "you believed in me when no one else did. You gave me strength when I had nothing left inside." He continued, "I do not have much, but I have a good heart, and I will always care for you." Juliet looked at him with warm eyes and did not say anything at first. Then she smiled the same smile he had seen on that very first evening. "I have been waiting for you to say that for a very long time, Romeo." Signor Ricci gave Romeo his blessing with a warm and proud smile. Even Signora Ricci wiped a small tear from the corner of her eye. The wedding was simple, warm, and full of laughter and happy voices. All the brave ones came dressed in their best clothes that beautiful day. Bruno cried the loudest and made everyone around him laugh at once. Viola stood quietly at the side and smiled with her whole heart. After the wedding, Romeo stood in front of all his friends outside. He looked at each face: Alfredo, Dante, Antonio, Luca, Pietro, Bruno, Viola. These were the people who had stood beside him through everything hard. "I came to Rome alone with nothing but a small bag and a big dream. But I found something much greater than I ever expected to find here. I found all of you, and that is the greatest gift of my whole life." The friends laughed, embraced, and stayed together until the stars appeared. Romeo looked up at the Roman sky and thought of his village far away. He had left as a poor and lonely boy with nothing in his small hands. He returned one day to visit, not poor anymore, but rich in every way. Rich in friendship, in love, in courage, and in everything that truly matters. And in Rome, the story of Romeo and the brave ones was never forgotten.